Hello there, Juranish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Smoky whiskey today, doing the black tie affair. So, I'm going to be tasting a whiskey that I honestly never really thought I'd have an opportunity to taste. And I actually didn't even know that it existed. But not too long ago, I had a chance to meet our local Bruichladdich rep, Lana, who now sadly is leaving the area and going out to the West Coast to continue to work for Bruichladdich and introducing people to whiskeys across the Pacific Northwest. Before she left a couple of bottles of whiskey with me, more than a couple, and so I will be reviewing some of those along the way. Now, some of these whiskeys I think just sat on her shelf for a long period of time and they weren't opened. So I got an opportunity to taste some things here that you probably won't be able to find, but there's always a little bit of a story that goes in with these whiskeys when I do the reviews anyway, something that I either try to impart to help you increase your whiskey knowledge or maybe to help you understand if an opportunity like this arises again, what you might expect out of a particular whiskey. So, if you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know that one of my favorite whiskeys is Port Charlotte's 10-year-old heavily peated. And I'm a big fan of peated whiskeys. And to me, this one is like smoky silk. It's just a really, really nice whiskey with a lot of diversity to it. What I didn't know is that in the past, there was an Islay Barley version of this that was also at 50% ABV, but that did not use the Caledonian Forest barley, but instead used Islay barley. And the difference between Caledonian Forest and Islay barley is this thing we call terroir. And part of what I'm going to talk about in this episode today is about the influence of a man named Mark Grenier, who was the person who basically brought Bruichladdich back after it had fallen basically out of sight. And he brought in a distiller named Jim McEwan, and Jim McEwan is brilliant. He's since left also. But while he was there, he oversaw this idea of creating whiskeys with terroir in mind. So getting barley from different places. Now, when I went to Ireland, Mark Grenier's newest distillery, which he got, I think, around 2015 or so, is Waterford. And so Waterford, I got the opportunity to taste whiskey new make. So a new make, not whiskey yet, 3 years in Ireland for something to become a whiskey. I got a chance to taste these new makes from different farms. All single malts, all using the same yeast. So they're really in a controlled situation. And all of this barley from each of these different farms from around Ireland are all distilled the same way. And the idea is that you would be able to taste any differences in that barley and how it evolved. And so a lot of times, and I get this from other Islay whiskey drinkers, they will say, well, the reason that a Islay whiskey is smoky and medicinal is because of the air getting into the barrel. But what I realized after doing these tastings at Waterford is that, and I didn't really realize it, it was told to me, and it absolutely makes sense, that the barley is also affected by terroir, not by how airflow hits it. So in other words, because it's sitting by the sea versus something that's inland doesn't mean that it's going to be picking up all of these sea characteristics because of the wind hitting it off of the sea. Where it gets it from is what that soil that it's being planted in, coming up through the roots, adding personality to that barley. And so this idea that barley doesn't really have a personality is absolutely wrong, because while I was at Waterford, I got the chance to taste these different whiskeys or these different new makes before they'd ever hit a barrel, before they'd ever had any other influence on them. And they were amazing in their diversity, the different characteristics that you could pick up. You'd have some minerally ones over here, you'd have some over here that would have a briny characteristic to them. Others tasted like, grape nuts. They just had a very heavy grain kind of a flavor to them, maybe a citrusy note coming into them. And these are all just barley, folks. Now there were different types of grains that they would use occasionally, but all of this really started over at Bruichladdich. And apparently what happened was Mark Rainier did not want to leave Bruichladdich, but he ended up having to leave. Not for bad reasons, but just because I have to go back and read a little bit more on that, because I've kind of forgotten the circumstance. But it wasn't something bad. It was just the fact that he's kind of just pushed out. And so when he decided to get back in the game, that's when he went to Waterford to really start working on this idea of terroir again. And this bottle that I have here that I got from Lana is an example of one of those barley experiments. Basically what happened here, and you'll see, this actually has Jim McEwan's name on it. And he left and retired from Bruichladdich in 2015. This bottle, there's a stamp on the back of it, is from January 20th of 2015. So this was 6 months before Jim decided to leave the distillery. And if you pick up one of these bottles, it has so much information on it. When we talk about transparency, this is really cool because it tells you that it comes from, this one is 2008, 6 farms, 6 terroirs. So it tells you it comes from the Cool Farm. I'm gonna mess these names up. Island, Rockside, these are easy. No, I'm not gonna say these. Sunderland. And then there's 2 that are Gallic names that I'm just gonna pass on for the moment. But anyway, really interesting to see that they developed something like this. It is peated to 40 ppm, which when we hear heavily peated, we might think that it's blowing beyond a certain level, but 40 ppm is actually sort of mild. It's not octomore territory, that's for sure. Now, when we look at these 2 whiskeys, the first thing you're going to note is that they are 2 different shades. All right, so this one's a little darker than this one, and that is because this is a 10-year-old whiskey, and this one is a non-age stated. Can we tell the age by the percentage of change in color? Probably not, because what I find is that when you first put a whiskey into a barrel, it picks up color rather quickly, and then the change becomes more gradual over time. All right, let's do a little nosing on these. I don't know if I'm going to be able to tell much of a difference in these. I have not nosed these 2 against each other up to this point. So this is a very familiar nose to me. There is a medicinal quality to this, just a hint of a medicinal quality to it. There's almost like a Vicks vapor rub that comes in. It's a nice meaty kind of a smell that comes through on it. This one is lighter. Does not come at you with the medicinal smell, which is interesting because we're talking about, this is the Islay barley. But it's such a lighter nose. Yeah, the smoke is much more prevalent on this, which is fascinating because I tend to think that smoke dissipates over time. There's a minerally note also that comes through in that I don't necessarily pick up on this one. Let's do a tasting on it. very flavorful. Nice vanilla notes in there. It's called heavily peated. Ooh, nice little custard kind of a note that came in there. And then it gets very nice grain notes on the finish. For the non-peated fan, it's probably going to be too peaty. To me, it's just nice, a really nice, even smoke on there that blends in with that grain note. It is a very refined kind of a flavor coming in with a little bit of that egg custard coming in on the finish. That's not something that I've really tasted so much in Port Charlotte 10. Yeah, smoke much heavier on this. Not overbearing. A little cocoa and some fruit, maybe even a cherry kind of a note that comes in on that. And then finishes with kind of a meaty smoke. So the smoke is definitely more prevalent in the 10, which counteracts my argument that peat is lost over time, because in this particular case, they seem to be quite even. This is a nice light drinker, honestly, for the peat fan. It's something that is very interesting. So I don't know if they're still doing this Islay Barley Port Charlotte heavily peated anymore, but no, that'll be a very interesting one to sip on. It's not as awkward as the MC whiskey that I had not too long ago. It had some funky flavors in it. This doesn't have any funky flavors in it. It's just a nice, comfortable, smoky whiskey. Very pleasant drinker, and yeah, no, I look forward to diving a little deeper into this one. A little of that matchstick quality, vanilla, the lemon. Yeah, no, that's really, really nice. Jim McEwan, he knew what he was doing. Now he's over at Ardnahoe. That he retired, and then all of a sudden he picked up and he saw a new distillery on Islay and said, "Oh, okay, I'll lend a hand over there." So it'd be very interesting to see what happens with their whiskeys over there as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. This discussion of terroir, it's going to go on and on. Sooner or later, I would actually love to have Mark Grenier on the podcast, because I have talked to his head distiller and head brewer, and I mean, honestly, the amount of information that they gave me and the insights that they gave me into grain, absolutely mind-blowing. Or to have one of them on the show, because it's amazing, and they have told me that they're frustrated by the fact that there are people in the industry who say barley is basically one-dimensional. It is not necessarily a grain with a lot of flavor. It's what you do with it in terms of barrels that makes a difference, and that is absolutely not the case. I absolutely know that to be the truth, because I have tasted it in the new make spirit, and it is astounding how different the flavors are in different types of barley. And now that in Ireland they're working on all these heritage grains, they have grains now between Blackwater and Waterford. They are going back into the archives, and they're pulling out grains that have not been used in 100 years, that have been put into an archive, and now they have slowly started growing these heritage grains, and they are now starting to we're now starting to get to a point where soon we will be able to taste those historic barleys that were left for dead because the Irish whiskey industry got down to one big multinational owning it. And once that happened, it basically, it was left to the accountants to determine what got put into the whiskey. And so if you've got a barley that doesn't create a lot of yield, then you're going to let it go. And that's what happened over time. These all just kind of got left to the side. So fun, because we're getting to taste grains that haven't seen a whiskey bottle in generations. So interesting stuff coming down the pike. Hope you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these. I try to feed your head with knowledge even when I'm doing some simple stuff here in terms of tasting, and tell you a little bit about my experiences along the way. Like the video if you did. Enjoy this video so that other people can find the video as well, and leave your comments if you have any questions about barley, the experiences that I've had, or if you've had these and you want to talk about them. Love to hear your comments. Until next time, cheers and Slainte. That is really, really nice.